Hello, everyone. Welcome to my talk on the missing leadership element. Today, we're going to talk about why self-awareness is crucial for actually getting the most out of your company in the long run and getting the success that you want in the long run. So my name is Martijn van Zwieten. Let me tell you a little bit about myself first so that you can assess where I'm coming from with all of this. So this is my career in the industry in bird's eye view. I started out in PR with a little sidestep in organizing some trade missions to Japan. When I got bored of PR, I decided I wanted to be more on the management side of things, and so I did an MBA, and I pivoted more to operations and general management before doing business development. And then during the pandemic, made a little sidestep into non-gaming company called Global Talk, which is interpreting company where they wanted to do more with innovation, but I didn't like that at all. So I came back running to the games industry now. Right now, what I do is I'm a independent management consultant. I'm a business coach / consultant, and I help ambitious leaders build great companies. So basically, I'm taking all of my experience from 13 years of working in the games industry with everything I know from my MBA, and I combine that to help companies really prepare for that next leg of growth. And what that means usually is I help them work on the management side of things, obviously, because you need to have a firm grip on whatever's going on in your company. I help them figure out the strategy side of things because you want to know where you're going, how you're positioning yourself, and what the best route is to success. And if you believe most literature on the subject, then actually, if you do those two things, you're already a pretty awesome leader. But what I'm going to argue today is that actually we need a third one, which is self-awareness. And if you combine those three, then you're really in a position to be the best leader that you can be for your company. So let's look at Activision Blizzard as an example. They have amazing games. They have almost infinite resources. When you look at their website, so from what you can tell from the outside about their management, they have these beautiful values set up. It's about the people. It's about integrity. It's about every voice that matters, leading responsibly. And if you read their year reports, then they have these amazing, well thought out strategies as well. But still, something is missing that leads to things like this. It's not what it seems on the outside. On the inside, actually, they have some problems, some pretty severe problems. And something's missing. So what's making that this actually happens and that it's not as easy as we have got our management side set up, we've got our strategy set up, and now we're good to go? Something's missing. And the same with CD Projekt Red. CD Projekt Red has had a big issue with crunch. It's one of the big problems in our industry collectively. And they said, you know what, we're not going to do crunch anymore. They said this in early 2019. Then they said it again later that year. They said, actually, we're not going to do crunch, not this time. But then they crunched anyway. And so now, of course, they've promised again not to do crunch. But CD Projekt is, again, the same thing. They have these great management structures. They've got everything set up. They're a big company. They've done huge projects before. They know what they're doing. But still, something is missing, and that's making things fall apart at the seams and making some cracks appear in what's otherwise a beautiful, beautiful picture. So just to put that in a little bit of context, I'm not singling these two companies out because I think they're evil or because I think they're doing a bad job, because the core of all game development is, and all companies are, running a company is really, really hard. It's really hard. There's all these different stakeholders. There's a huge amount of resources to manage. It's incredibly difficult to make it work at all, let alone make it work well. Second thing I believe is everyone is doing the best they can. Everyone is doing to the extent that they can and that they believe it to be the best thing to do. They're doing the best they can. Also, the people at Activision Blizzard, I fully believe that. But, and this is the crucial one, in all companies, everything that happens is downstream of leadership behavior and leadership decisions. So what I mean by that is this. If you look at everything that happens in a company as sort of this stream, then if we take, for example, crunch is all the way at the end. It's a result. It's not a cause. So what could cause crunch? Well, probably the first step up is it's project management, the way the project is managed, right? And what's making that it's so that the project management isn't running as smoothly as it could? Well, there's reasons for that. There's probably one aspect is company culture, and another aspect could be budget. And these two things together, and probably a host of other things, are making it so that the project management doesn't really run well, and that at the very end you end up in a crunch situation. But then what are the inputs for company culture and budget? Well, then we end up at the top, and that's where leadership is responsible for this whole stream of results, this whole stream of consequences by what they decide, the decisions that they make, and the way they behave themselves. The behavior that they set for the company is actually what ends up setting the tone. And so it becomes a question of judgment. What does the leadership judge to be right and wrong decisions? How do they make those decisions, and how do they follow through on those decisions? And when I realized this, I figured, well, if it's about right and wrong and it's about judgment, I'm pretty sure I've heard this before, like leadership needing to be in a position to make good judgments, to think things through. And when I thought about it a little bit more, I figured out where I'd heard this before, and it's actually this guy, which is, for those of you that are into Greek philosophy, it's Plato. And he introduced the concept of the philosopher king. And the idea of the philosopher king is described in his book, The Republic. And his main idea is that the philosopher king is the best type of king. Why? Because when you're a philosopher, you have a thirst for knowledge, you have a better understanding of how things work, and you have a drive to uncover the truth. And those three things make sure that if you are then a king and you have to make those decisions, you take the most context into that decision. And he actually went as far as to say that until philosophers rule as kings, there can be no happiness. So he's pretty adamant about the fact that if you're a king or a leader in our case, then you really have to think things through, and you have to take into account like the broadest possible context to make the best possible decision. So knowing that's what Plato said, let's take that as a basis, but we have to amend a little bit to the reality that we live in right now. So here we have the philosopher king who's looking at the world and he's trying to understand it, but that's not really useful for our perspective. So probably let's divvy that up first. So the philosopher king has to know about the world, sure, but he has to know a little bit more about the city-state that he rules. He has to know more about the ins and outs in order to govern effectively than he does about the rest of the world. And then, of course, today, we don't really run things as kings. No, we're managers. And we don't really run a city-state. We run a company. As leaders, we run a company instead of kings running city-states. And the domain of how you run your company, that's management, what I alluded to before. And then the world is not really the world at large. When we, as leaders, think about the world, we tend to think of it in terms of the market and how the market reacts and the players in the market. And the way we think about that is the domain of strategy, right? And so this is where I think we can add something to the concept of Plato's philosophy, but also to the way that we look at things now is when you take into account both the outside market, the world, and you look at your company, there's still one element that's left. And one element that we really need to take into account if we want to get the full picture and make the best possible decision and have the best possible insight. And that's the little guy in the middle here. The way that we think as leaders when we do things, when we decide things, when we behave ourselves in certain ways. And that's the domain of self-awareness. And that's why I said at the beginning, these three components are actually crucial for making the best possible decisions and being the best possible leader. So what is self-awareness? Well, self-awareness is at the core, of course, understanding yourself. But what does that mean? So there's a couple of components to this. First, there's physical. I'm sure all of you have realized at some point that when you're tired, when you're hungry, you're not really your best possible self. You're cranky, you make snap decisions, maybe you even snap at people. So your hunger, your physical state has a very, very real influence on how you behave and how you show up. Then there's emotional. According to fairly recent research, there are actually 27 distinct emotions that people can feel at any one point in time. Now, I don't know about you. I'm happy on a day that I can identify 4 emotions. But unless you're capable of identifying and mitigating the impact of 27 emotions, there's probably some work left to be done, because the better you understand those emotions, the better you'll be able to take those into account and bring your best self to the table. So this is a screenshot from a very, very long Wikipedia page on cognitive biases. And all of these have impact on how you think and how you make decisions. So that can be anything from things like recency bias, things you've heard recently weigh heavier on your thinking and on your decision making than things you've heard longer ago. Or things like how close you are to people. People that are close to you, you tend to value their opinion higher than people that are further away from you, even if those people further away from you may have better information and have actually a more acute understanding of what's going on. So all of these things together, and there's about 1 million of these, they all basically hamper your cognitive ability and the way that you think. Your brain was not designed to make perfect decisions. Your brain was designed to survive in a very, very concrete environment, and your brain has evolved to make snap decisions in that environment, not to make the best possible decisions. And the common denominator between all these three is a lot of the stuff that you should be trying to become aware of actually happens in your subconscious, and that's why you're not automatically aware of it. This all happens below your conscious, below the things that you know you're thinking, the things you know you're feeling. It happens below that. So it takes a little work to get that to the surface and understand it better. So now we can add another belief to these 3 points that I shared before, is business is hard, everyone's doing the best they can, and everything is downstream of leadership, behavior, and decisions. And the one I want to add is actually a quote from Carl Jung, which is, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Meaning, because it is unconscious, but it still has a very large impact on your life, you will want to put in the work to integrate your conscious and your subconscious, because you don't want your unconscious to be something that happens to you while you're not paying attention. You want it to be something that you are aware of and that you can not so much control, but at least impact or mitigate the impact of. And why does this matter? Well, let me just make it very, very easy. If you have 2 companies and there's one company where someone is really good at understanding the market, really good at understanding their company, but they're not self-aware, and you clone that company, but you change nothing else, but you add more self-awareness, I am fully convinced that if you put those 2 together, then the company with the leader with more self-awareness will actually make better decisions for the long run, as well as the short run, and lead a better team. So let me give you a very concrete example of how this might play out. So this is something that actually happened to me. This is me on the left, and this is my manager in the middle. And my manager had just explained a plan, and I wasn't sure that it was going to work. And so I was thinking about that, and when I think about something, I look like this. That's not something I plan to do. It's not what I like to look like, but it's just what I look like. Some people have resting bitch face. I have thinking bitch face. And so what I told them is this plan has flaws. Now, maybe imagine that my manager at the time had some doubts of their own, so they weren't sure that it was the perfect plan, and so this is the feedback they get. And the feedback they give me then, in turn, is you're being too negative, right? They have a very, it's harder for them to welcome that criticism with open arms and say, well, let's listen to this, but their main reaction is, their initial reaction is, you're being too negative. So what happens then is the plan doesn't change because, I'm being negative apparently, and the conversation stops. I don't give feedback over time. I stop giving feedback more and more. I keep my feedback to myself because there's not really a place for it to be discussed. The plan is worse off because whatever feedback I had, whatever points that were actually good points that would alter the plan and improve the plan, they don't get discussed, let alone implemented. And so the results will be poorer. Now, imagine a manager, a philosopher king or a philosopher leader, if you will, and they're better able to look at their own reactions. And so they can say, well, that's hard to hear, but at the same time, I want to learn more because I want to improve the plan. I want the best results for the company. If they were able to do that, then the plan would improve, first of all. I would know that that they're receptive to feedback in whatever form I give it. I would then be able to give feedback more often. Every plan from then on will have a better chance of being a better plan, and probably the results will be better. And then, of course, you want to move from manager A to manager B as much as you possibly can, as much as you can manage. that's up to the leaders. And of course, I can take my own lesson from this, which I have, which is I can probably deliver my feedback in a little bit more of a positive or sandwiched way than just your plan sucks. So how this plays out in companies is, if you look at Activision Blizzard, if you look at CD Projekt Red, if you look at the examples we've discussed, but this goes for other companies as well. The question at the core when a company is doing something other than what it's saying, and in this concrete example, the question is it necessary to sacrifice the physical and mental health of your employees to make great games and build a successful company? You might believe this, or you might not believe this, but in both cases, there's a way to act on those beliefs with integrity, which is if you don't believe that it's necessary, and by all accounts, that's what we are meant to believe about Activision Blizzard and about CD Projekt Red and what they're working on, I believe, and what they're saying to us on the outside is, this is something we value, this is something we want to change. But then you commit to diversity and you commit to inclusion, you commit to crunchless development, and you actually follow through. So whenever something happens that goes against those commitments, those beliefs, you act on it to change them and to keep things on rails. Or if you fully believe that it is necessary, even if it's just every once in a while, to sacrifice the physical and mental health, or to cross those borders and to take more from your employees than you would necessarily want to do in a regular situation, then you set different expectations. You can still act on that belief with integrity. You will have a different company, but you can state upfront what your expectations are of your employees, the working conditions that you expect them to work in, and what it would take from them to thrive in that situation and in that environment. And so that's what I mean. So even in those cases, I would say that every leader benefits from diving into self-awareness, becoming more aware of how they show up, what they truly believe, how they make decisions, why they make decisions, and how that impacts the other two elements, namely management and strategy, in order to really make the best decisions for the company and lead the company to the best possible results. And so at the very core, basically, make it really flat, is good leaders have to look not just outside, but inside as well. Now, if you're used to reading more a certain type of management theory or business books, and you try to stay away from the corner on self-improvement and self-help, then probably this is where your bullshit radar goes off. You're telling me to look inside. So what? You want me to do meditation retreats? You want me to become enlightened maybe? Right? What's the point here? Do I need to become the next Buddha? No, that's not the case. So what I'm saying is all of that is possible. And I happen to believe that that will bring you benefits as well, if you look at it that way. But the main thing is, wherever you are on this scale of somewhere between caveman and fully enlightened, you will get benefits if you move a little bit to the right. And however far you want to move, in whatever tempo you want to do it, that's up to you. But you will see benefits, because the better you understand yourself, the better you understand your role and your internal world, the better you can take that into account when you make decisions for the company and when you make decisions for the team, and when you ask them to do things for you. And to do this, I've collected 7 easy-ish ways to develop self-awareness, because we want to make it a little bit concrete as well. This is not just an inspirational talk. I actually want to give you some tools for those of you that do want to work on self-awareness. These are some ways that you can start on that journey and start on that path in order to move a little bit to the right on that scale I just showed you. And now I say easy-ish because there's a scale here, and there's also one outlier, but I'll explain that one when I get to it. So the first one, that's probably the easiest on the list to do, is you can do a psychometric test. There's a bunch of different ones, and all of them help you understand at least how you see yourself and how you think and how you think you do things. And there's a couple of different ones. Myers-Briggs is a very, very well-known one. 16personalities.com is a good example of this test. There's the Big Five, Ocean. That's actually the one that's the most well-supported, the best supported by scientific evidence. And there's Spiral Dynamics, which is also similar. That's the one actually that I've had the most, the best results with. But all of these will give you some insight into who you are, what your drivers are, how you do things, what you find important. And it's a very, very good starting point for discovering a little bit more about yourself. Even if what it tells you is you don't like it at all, or if the test is flawed, it doesn't really matter, because it's a starting point in getting to know yourself better. Second thing you can do is keep a journal. I'm a big fan of the 5-minute journal, as Tim Ferriss describes it. So it's an easy way to note down a little bit of what you're thinking, how you're feeling, what you're working on, and what's important to you. And as you do that over time, you'll start to see patterns, and you'll be able to look at trends and trend lines and through lines in your life of things that bother you more often. So maybe there's something there that's worth exploring that you can understand better, so that it either doesn't bother you, or you can turn that anxiety or that stress into something more productive. And then you can see it coming next time, maybe, and you'll be able to deal with the issue in a more productive way the next time. And so getting it, doing it in a structural way and doing it over time, that's really the important part here. Another thing you can do is you can sketch out your life path. So this is an assignment that we were asked to do during my MBA, which had a big component that focused on self-improvement and self-discovery. And what they asked us to do was to look at our life in a series of brackets. So 0 to 12, 12 to 18, and in my case, 18 to 30, because I was 30 when I started the program. And they ask you to look at what are the major milestones, the major influences that occurred in your life during that time. And what that allows you to do is it allows you to get some patterns on paper. And the more you look at it and the more you dive in, the more you'll be able to see not just what are the events that made me who I am, but also what are the beliefs that flow from these influences and from these events and these experiences, and how has that turned me into the leader that I am today? Why do I feel the way I do about how I run this company? What are the values that I hold as far as company management goes, as far as team management goes, how I treat my team members, what I value in my company over other things. And this will tell you a lot about yourself. And if you're interested, you can send me a message and I'll send you the full assignment. But it's a little bit of work, but I would say that it's very, very much worth the effort. Another thing you can do, which is also, again, worth the most if you do it consistently and over time, is meditation and mindfulness. Now, I am no expert on either of these things. As far as I understand it, meditation and mindfulness, or at least as I try to practice it, is mostly a way of stepping back from your conscious mind and your cognitive mind in order to get a little bit of distance and be able to question or just let go of whatever it is that your mind is trying to tell you, that your brain is trying to tell you. And that can give you more perspective. It can make you more resilient to stress and to other negative impacts in your life. And there's a bunch of ways to do this, right? The simplest way is to just close your eyes and sit down and focus on your breath. But there's other ways, and there's actually a lot of helpful tools. If you want to dive into this, Headspace is a very well-known one, and one that I like a lot is Waking Up by Sam Harris. And these are guided meditations that will just allow you to get through it in a more structured manner than if you were just left to your own devices. So if you're interested in this, I highly recommend that you check either of these out. Now, another part of self-awareness is you're not going to be doing this alone, because you will definitely need feedback from the outside, right? The same way that whatever Activision Blizzard and CD Projekt Red, the way they differ on the inside versus what they want people to see on the outside, every person is the same way. So you see yourself a certain way, but other people will see you differently. And especially if you want to change that, you're going to need an outside perspective. So you will need to get better at receiving feedback. And then if you want to pay it forward, you also need to get better at giving feedback. And so these two books are very, very good for that. They're both by the same authors, Douglas Stone and Sheila Heen. And these are really good at making you understand not just how to give feedback, but also why certain types of feedback have a different impact on people, depending on how you frame it and what you're trying to tell them. So I really recommend anyone to dive into this and get better at it, because giving feedback is such a crucial part of communication that you will need it at every part in your career, at every aspect of your leadership role. You will need to be able to do this, and you need to be able to do it well if you want people to actually take that feedback to heart. And if you want to be a better leader, you need to learn to take feedback as well. Now, this is the big one. I said these were easy-ish. There is nothing easy about therapy, but what I want to say about this without being too preachy, I fully believe that anyone could benefit from therapy because everyone has gone through some shit. It doesn't even have to be major trauma, but everyone has some unpacked shit in their life that they would probably do well to unpack and understand a little bit better and understand how that is driving some of their behavior. I've gone to therapy for some relatively minor things, and I do believe that it's made me better at navigating those types of circumstances. But mainly what I want to say is, if there is some stuff in your life, if there are aspects to self-discovery and self-development that feel uncomfortable, it might be good to get a professional in that situation, in that process, to help you guide you through that process in a safe way. And that might really help you. And that's all I want to say about that, of course, because this is a touchy subject. But I just want to make sure that at least you know that I believe that therapy is actually a good thing. It's nothing to be ashamed about, and it could be very much worth it in your both your personal trajectory and your professional trajectory. Now, to bring it back a little bit to more the team aspect and the company aspect, is when you decide to go on this self-awareness trip, on this path, you might want to do it with your team as well. And of course, bringing more people in makes every process a lot more difficult, and self-awareness especially. So that's why I put it at the end. This is next to therapy is probably the hardest one. But here as well, there are very good sources, very good resources to make this a lot easier. These are 3 books that I really like. There's the 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership, which is very much about self-awareness and how you build it with your team and what that actually entails and how you can keep each other accountable for doing so. There's Brené Brown, Dare to Lead. Brené Brown is most well known for her, I would say her books on vulnerability and courage. But in this book, she really pivots it or makes the whole thing built around running a company and running a team. So she takes those things, vulnerability and courage, which are very much part of self-awareness and how you show up in a team, and she builds a program around it. And Dare to Lead is a very good workbook also that you can use to introduce this subject to your team. The other one, and this is sort of a bonus one, since most of us have very multicultural teams, understanding those cultures is actually a very easy step to getting a little bit more aware of how you do things versus how others do things, and that it's not necessarily a question of one having to conform to the other, but there are ways to bridge those gaps. And The Culture Map by Erin Meyer is a great book that illustrates how how cultures can actually differ from each other and where that comes from and how you might be able to bridge it in an effective way. So that can also help you to build that part of self-awareness in your team and in your teams. And so having said that, I think there's also a longer timeline and a broader context to see this in, which is that I believe that if we start with more self-aware leaders, then those self-aware leaders, they will become better leaders. They will be better leadership. They will have a more positive influence on their company, which means, they will make better decisions. They will be more aware of how they show up. They can take that into account. They can take the long-term aspects into account a little bit better. They will create better cultures because of that, because they are aware also of how people react to them. If you have better cultures, then your company will be better because people feel positive about your company. They will be able to bring more to the company, so the company will end up being better. And if we have all of these companies with self-aware leaders, with better cultures, with better results, then in the end, I really believe that seed of self-awareness can lead to a better industry for everyone. And that's what I wish for all of us. So thank you. That was my talk on self-awareness. I hope that this has brought you something, even if it's just a little seed of inspiration on your own path towards self-awareness and better leadership, or maybe a concrete tool that you can use on that path. And I hope that you use this to really make the most out of your role as a leader and your company. And I wish you a very, very pleasant and eventful conference. Thank you.